Welcome back. I'm Scott Kirshner. I'm here with Dina Shelton and Marissa Sanders. And in this episode, we're going to talk about navigating and working together with your kids' birth families. And Marissa, do you want to start this one off?
Yeah, so over the last several years, I think the child welfare system in America, nationally and on many state levels and county levels, has seen a little bit of a shift toward birth families. In some states, they refer to foster and kinship families as resource families, with the idea that they would be a resource for the birth family. So we've shifted towards wanting families to work with the birth family to help them get their kids back or to be a resource for them, and even to build those relationships even after adoption so that kids still have a connection to their biological family. And it's something that a lot of families really struggle with. And it requires us, I think, to really take stock of our own beliefs about families whose kids enter the system or are in need of adoption, and what might have gotten them to that point, and how you can bridge into a relationship there.
Yeah, and I appreciate this topic being brought up too, because the experience of working as a foster adoptive parent with your children and the concept of birth families is one that you do not escape, no matter what type of adoption or foster care you provide. Even kinship, the decisions and making active decisions of when, how, and what does adoptive family engagement look like. It's very individual to every family, but and I say you have to do it intentionally. You don't have to, no one can force you to, but if you don't, it ends up being one of the things that gets in the way of your relationship in your own family. You either do it intentionally or it's done on the side. And so I've talked to so many families who made decisions of things like, our kid wants to do a DNA test and do like an ancestry profile. What does it look like for them as older teenagers to start looking at some of these things? Is it better for our children to wait until they're in college or until they are in high school? Is it better to bring it up or have them bring it up? All of these questions are big questions with, quite frankly, no set answers, except that we have to be open and be doing this on purpose, because there's no set answers, because this is not how all of this is supposed to go. So there's no perfect right way to do it. We have to do the best that we can and be intentional with it.
Yeah, and some of those questions change based on the age that the child was when they came into care, or when they were removed from their birth family. If they are older, they may have memories. They may want to reconnect, and there may be history that gives you some pause there about that reconnection. When they're younger, like my son, he has a lot of unknown questions. He has a lot of questions about, I'm sure that as he gets older and finds language for it, there will be questions like, well, who do I look like? And what do these people that contributed to my DNA look like? And do I want to meet them? Do I want to just see pictures? Do I want to get to know them? All of those kinds of questions that will come up for him and are starting to already. And
we also have to recognize too that we live in a world where no longer do you just have the option to keep everything secret. That even though adoption records are sealed and things of that nature, that our children have access to online resources very early. And even without our permission or handing them a smartphone or something like that, their access to computers and phones at school and with other people to look up things and search, that curiosity is going to be natural in this, the desire to want to know more. And we have to we have to really reframe our mindset in this too, as being gatekeepers of this information. Not gatekeepers and keeping it out, but how, when, and what is provided, and being the ones who are fostering this with our children and not just holding it back, or not just trying to keep it sealed. Otherwise, they'll find a different way. They'll climb the fence, right? If we're not explaining how and when they use the gate.
Yeah, I like that mental image. That's a really good one. And a lot of that can happen after adoption. When you're still fostering, you have even less control over what information they might get, or what, a lot of times when kids come into foster care, the state sets up, or the county sets up, supervised visits with the birth family. So there's still some contact. They may or may not ask a foster family to supervise phone calls or supervise visits sometimes. And so then it's a little bit different especially if reunification is still the goal. Then my goal in building a relationship with birth mom is to help me care for the child now. So in some states, they actually mandate, not in West Virginia, but in some, they actually mandate a call to the birth parent, between the foster parent and the birth parent, within the first 24 to 48 hours of placement, so that I can ask questions like, is this child allergic to anything? What are their favorite foods, or foods that they hate? What kinds of things help comfort them? What's your bedtime routine, so that I can help keep things as normal as I can for them? And also reassure the parent, and the goal with those calls usually is to reassure the birth parent that I'm not trying to take your place. I'm here to care for the child until you can get your life straightened out and get to a point where you can safely care for the child. And when we do that successfully, we have lots of foster and adoptive parents who say, I was able to build a relationship with that birth mom such that they are now part of our extended family, even if I ended up adopting their child. Or even if their child went back to live with them, they still come and spend weekends with me. Or we do big holiday, family gatherings. And so I'm able to maintain it. It helps with some of the ambiguity the foster parents experience, because even when they reunify, I'm able to maintain contact and know how they're doing, and be a caring adult in their life, and be a resource to the birth parent, who may just really need people to help out with childcare, or, I've got 3 kids going in 3 different directions tonight, and I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I have this other parent I can lean on now that I maybe didn't have before.
I love hearing these stories, these sort of success stories where the relationship between the foster parent and the birth parent is so good. I wonder if you could both share us more kind of details of just amazing things that have happened in terms of this.
I've spoken with lots of foster families in West Virginia who have had those experiences, sometimes in spite of the foster care system, right? Sometimes not with the support necessarily of the system, but just have been able to to build those relationships and to add to their family, not just the child, but the child's whole, sometimes grandparents even, or aunts and uncles who were part of the child's life. And really that ends up being the best thing for the child, right? Because now they have lots and lots of adults who care for them. And when that birth parent can feel that they have the support of the foster family, that as a birth parent, so if you imagine, and one of the things we hear about all the time in West Virginia is a lot of times it has to do with addiction, that parents can't care for the child because of addiction. So we know that oftentimes, if not always, when someone's experiencing addiction, it's because they've had their own trauma. And this is sort of a coping mechanism for them. Then we come in and remove their child, and often we see them relapse, and people say, well, they chose drugs over their child. No, they chose the coping mechanism that they knew when you inflicted a new trauma on them. And so if we can give them support and reassure them that I'm not looking to replace you, I'm not looking to come in and sort of rescue your child from you. I want to help you be able to care for the child. And I want to care for the child and keep them safe while you spend the time you need to deal with your trauma and to get the recovery that you need. And that is a very different mindset than a lot of people come into foster care or even adoption with. So it's really requiring a big cultural shift in how we think about this process.
And Marissa, doesn't this go back to this same concept of predicting and controlling, right? Because when we look at a parent who's let their child down, we want to swoop in and go really black and white and say, you have damaged this child and you're not capable of handling this child, and just sever it off. You pick drugs over your kids, you're done. Mm-hmm. And we know, thankfully for the, newer research, just how incredibly damaging, and how much better it is for families to be able to stay together if at all possible.
Mhm.
And it requires us to move in that and shift. But for those of us who may choose to work with families who are in the midst of struggle, you're right, it is a huge mindset shift for us. It
Mhm.
is a big change in being able to sit with and be with people in spaces that we may not understand fully, that we may not have the same struggles, but it really pushes on us a lot to address and challenge ideas in ourselves that, and a lot of it is arrogance, that we could never be there, that
Mhm.
somehow they are just so much worse of a person than we are, and that we have all this other ability to take care of things than they do, that it's moving into a space of being able to see and hold multiple realities. It can be that we can work with you, and also it is not okay for you to continue to hurt your kid.
Right.
Like we can have both of those at the same time. And this is this integration component that people really struggle with. I think it's a chronic issue across the United States, struggling with being able to hold multiple truths at once and be able
Mhm.
to sit with it without needing to polarize for things to feel stable, that
Right.
it's all one way or the other way. And it is so hard. But this type of mentality is what opens doors for other groups to get involved in other ways.
Mhm.
There's a group called Safe Families. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's popping up around the country, has been for the past 10, 15 years or so. And it's a pre foster care system that churches can actually take on and train families within their churches. And the church supports the families that are helping, and the whole church kind of gets involved. So some families are host homes, some families are caregivers like babysitters and things like that. Some families are meal preparers and kind of take different roles to help support. And they say, we're gonna get referrals from the state, and the state usually gets involved because it lightens their load. That pre-services, where in Texas they might be referred to what's called family-based safety services, or FBSS, pre-removal of children, which the likelihood of them completing is almost nothing. They're not required to, nobody follows up, they just offer it to them. But instead they get them hooked into a group of people and voluntarily allow their children to go stay with another family for a little while they get a job and secure different housing. And those families and church then support that, and you're bringing people in. And it goes back to some of the same research that we understand and know about poverty. Ruby Payne has done some amazing work in terms of redefining poverty, not just as financial lack, but resource lack, and especially in terms of people resources, is one of the biggest reasons that people don't do well in life. Money doesn't fix the stuff, but when you don't have someone to call, someone to give you advice, someone to give you the next step, someone to help guide you in whatever it is you're doing, you're not going to succeed in whatever it is. There's not a single person that's been able to do that in any situation ever. We just don't recognize we've been on the receiving end of it.
And to talk a little bit more about that, and also the idea that we couldn't be there. Just this morning, someone posted in my Facebook group a news story about a woman, a mother, who had her children removed, and the way that they described the home. If you've ever seen an episode of Hoarders, that's immediately what comes up. And they talked about feces and rotting food and clutter and and all of these things in the home. And very recently, I reached out to a couple of my friends and I said, guys, the toys and the clothes are getting overwhelming in my house, and I can't go through all of them. I need some help. I really, I'm getting to the point where, there's just a lot, and I get overwhelmed when I start. And if somebody could just come sit with me and help me go through it, or even just be with me while I do it, it would help me a lot, because I'm getting anxious about it. And I read that article this morning and I thought, what if that mom had people she trusted that she could have called and said, you know what, I'm depressed and I can't do this right now and I need help. And it's possible that people offered that help and she, because of the depression, felt like she couldn't, if I let them in, they're going to see how bad it is. What are they going to think of me? All of those kinds of shaming things that go through your mind. But again, if she had those caring people and the ability to build those coping skills to say, I'm going to take this risk and invite you in to help me, maybe her kids would still be with her. I read this description and thought, she's not abusing her kids intentionally. She's not, trying to be hurtful or, doing anything. She's struggling and she's got some mental health issues. And if she had that community around her, and any one of us could be there. I mean, we talk about unexpected things that could happen to us, a traumatic brain injury or a traumatic event of some sort that happens in your life that could cause mental health challenges or physical challenges to get around your house and clean it. All of those things that could kind of put us in that same situation.
And this theme that we keep going back to, right, of we imagine that somehow our life is more predictable than others. It's only people on the other side who say you think it could never happen to you. And then it does, and everything changes and they see the world differently. And I wonder what would happen if on the front side of that, if we could listen to those people who've given us that wisdom, and we could sit on the front side and say, at any moment, life could change in a way where nothing would be the same as what I imagine it to be now. But that is what is real in life. And if we could really soak that in and sit with it as humans, not just as foster and adoptive parents, but especially as foster and adoptive parents, to sit and say, at any time, at any moment, my life could be completely different from what it is right now. And that is not what drives my decisions or my ideas about others or my judgment calls or anything else, that I hold that reality in full humility. It's a game changer.
This is one of the ways of interpreting Jesus' teaching that in order to gain your life, you have to lose your life, right? That you have to let go of your assumptions and your expectations, your sense of who you are and who other people are. You need to die to that version of what's going on in order to gain a new understanding, or in Buddhism, the idea of the impermanence of everything. And so to embrace that impermanence. It seems so important what you're saying, both of you, that the willingness to ask for help, which gets interpreted through my shame filters as, me being weak or imperfect, or, as if those are bad things. But when my shame filters are on, this is what's so isolating about shame, and this is how shame shows up. It shows up by not showing up. It shows up by not being willing to ask people for help. And certainly on the other side, there being people who are willing to step up. I was in a group last night with folks who had a lot of physical home instability, and talking about getting evicted and this and that, and how did they arrive at their stable place? Somebody gave them a break. It was, and half the time it was a random person that just reached a hand out at a time when they needed it, and that was all that they needed to turn things around. The other thing I wanted to lift up is I'm more aware of this, the equation here, working with the birth parents around their addictions and working with them around their desire to have their rights or their parental, whatever it is, restored. And there, and sort of like you were saying, Dina, it's so easy to vilify or tempting to vilify, but it's interesting sitting with folks who are on that side of the equation as they're trying to get their lives back together, as they're trying to get reunited with their kids. And just as an example of one of the dilemmas that they get stuck in, you might go into a medically assisted treatment program and have very good success getting off the opioids, and now you're doing medically assisted treatment, and you might be, by that definition, sober or clean for 6 months, for a year. But depending on what county you're in, and I'm not sure if this is statewide, Marissa, medically assisted treatment is not considered being clean. And so now you're faced with, do I stop doing this thing that's working well? I've got a job, I've got an apartment, this thing is working, but now do I risk, putting what I consider to be my sobriety at risk in order to achieve, that next step? You're familiar with this, Marissa,
yeah. And a couple of years ago, we actually legislated at the state level that we cannot refuse to reunify a child if that is the only thing that somebody would consider, addiction. If it's just because the parent is using medically assisted treatment, we can't. That's not a reason to not reunify. However, just because we legislated it doesn't mean it always happens. And we see that a lot. And I want to mention on a system level too, that, the issue of, you talked about shame filters and asking for help and some of the, and of course that's a skill that we want parents to have, right? We want them to reach out to their community and be able to do that. And yet, as a system, child welfare often interprets that as, it's not just me interpreting it through my shame lenses, but the system will put that on me. There's many times when families ask for help and the system says, oh, you're overwhelmed, we're going to take the kids. Or I just had a foster parent say to me, they were so proud of their teen who was struggling, and instead of doing some sort of self-destructive behavior, the teen called the therapist. And when the foster parent shared that with a worker, they said, oh, they're that dependent on their therapist? And they saw that as a dependence rather than, isn't that great that they've learned this coping mechanism of reaching out for help?
Isn't it great that they have a dependable therapist who they can reach out to?
Exactly. That was my first thought was, where did you find that therapist? You could call at any point. But the way that we interpret asking for help and expressing a need in the system, it can be dangerous and it can feel very scary to ask for help. And I think we need to address that. And I know we're running out of time, but I also wanted to mention, Dina talked earlier about being able to hold multiple truths at the same time. And one of those that I think we need to look more at in child welfare, and we're starting to, is just because the parent is not where they need to be right now, or may not ever be, doesn't mean that we need to cut the child off from them completely either. Even if we've terminated parental rights, it doesn't mean that parent can't ever be a part of the child's life in some way. And it may be writing letters, it may be exchanging a picture once a year. It doesn't have to be in-person contact, but there are ways to help kids maintain those connections even when the parent isn't safe, and kind of holding those two truths, that just because they're not safe right now doesn't mean that they're not important to that child, and there's not a way to maintain that.
Yeah. And the birth parent's experience of shame and guilt and remorse and grieving and all of that, certainly plays into that as well. So what an incredible dance. Just amazing. Dina, would you like the last word for today?
I just think that so much about this, and I always want to go back to this too, of the hope that comes with this. Sometimes it can be easy to hear these things with heaviness of, if I am a real black and white person and I just see things really clearly and kind of delineate, and I recognize that I struggle with holding multiple realities, or I recognize struggle in these places, I may hear this and go, God, another way that I'm not doing this right. And a space that I love to invite other parents into, because it's a space I've had to learn to walk in. This is not, Dina, the PhD and counselor and person who knows all this great stuff and has researched this. This is as the mom who had to figure this out and had to completely deconstruct my insides and rebuild it so that I could be a good parent to my kids. This is not about head knowledge at all. That it is terrifying to feel like this is so big and you can't do it right. But all of this information is really pointing back to, there's more to it than just what's in front of us. There's more to it than just looking at our kids' outcomes. There's more to this, of doing this well and doing it fulfilled and doing it healthy and having peace and centeredness in all of this that doesn't require it to go a certain way. There are other things that determine this. And so I hope that that's the lens that all of this can be heard through, that these are things that we can put effort and energy and attention into that give us a return on that investment. It's the right type of measuring stick for what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. So if you're having trouble navigating things with your birth parent, your kid's birth parent, that's okay too. We get
Absolutely.
that, right? It's
Absolutely.
Yeah, got it. Thank you both so much. I just feel so moved every time we get together and talk. And thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode.